Hi, I'm Mike Duggan. I've been teaching restorative dentistry for over 32 years now and to over 6,000 dentists. This video shows how I do it. Real-time, mannequin-based, hands-on, point of view, and patient real. If you are a pre-dental student, an aspiring teacher, an international dentist, join me at Duggan Oral Design, DugganOralDesign.com.
Okay, we're rolling.
All right. All right, so we're going to do a quick discussion about premolars, maxillary and mandibular. And based on the discussion we've had for the canine, we should be able to figure out pretty quickly what to do about premolars and basically all the posterior teeth. So with the premolar, we don't have the more complex anatomy of the molars that we've been working with the last few days. So we know a little bit about premolar anatomy. There's going to be a couple of ridges, a couple planes, and a C-plane around through here. Not everybody is getting the A, B, and C parts figured out. Some of you yesterday were not making a ridge here on the B-plane. So your B-plane wasn't really matching the space between the two opposing teeth and getting equal clearance on both sides. We'll try to do a little bit better on that now. But the key thing you need to realize that we've talked about the canine and 2 millimeters reduction and lots of porcelain over the incisal edge for the aesthetics. And we're going to do the same thing over here. For the premolar, we want 2 millimeters reduction on the facial cusp because the facial cusp of a premolar is basically a canine. I mean, the premolar is just a canine with a really big cingulate. Okay? The lobe structure is the same, so it should be pretty familiar. But the aesthetics on the upper arch, we want to make sure we get a full 2 millimeters reduction on all these facial cusps so that the lab can make lots of porcelain over there and have it look ideal. But the amount that we reduce the facial cusp here depends on two things. Depends on how much we reduce the A-plane. Also depends on how much we reduce the facial surface. So we're going to do a little bit of each to make sure we get the correct 2 millimeters off the incisal edge. That looks taller than 2 millimeters. How about I make it here? All right, so I'm going to start by doing some reduction on the A-plane. Make sure you reduce the central groove. And I could reduce it maybe like this, or maybe like this. Whatever I think I want to do, I could do it as if I'm doing a full crown, but that's just temporary. I'm going to reduce the A-plane temporarily. Make sure I reduce the central groove. Make sure I shift the ridge so it's wherever I want it, fitting the opposing teeth. Make flat planes all the way down to the marginal ridges, as we've discussed many times. And again, it's just temporary A reduction. Then we could do the rest of the occlusal, or we could do the facial reduction. So let me talk about just doing the facial reduction now so you see how it fits together. So how do I do the facial reduction? 3 depth cuts, join together, angle the shoulder. Okay, same thing. So we have an angle shoulder, taper matching the middle third, secondary plane. Do that. Now check the height of that cusp because now it's shorter since we've done the facial reduction. Check the height of the cusp, not 2 millimeters reduction yet, so change the A-plane. Put a little bevel out here. Now, our facial cusp has been reduced that 2 millimeters that we're looking for. So now the lab can really make a nice job aesthetically of that whole facial cusp. Now the B-plane and the C-plane are fairly familiar to us. We're going to assume that we're going to put, now this is a PFM, so it's metal and porcelain over the B-plane. So we're going to get a clearance of at least 1.5 millimeters. And since we're making a ridge on the B-plane here, and we're positioning that ridge opposite the two opposing teeth, we should get 1.5 plus over here and 1.5 plus over here. So we want to make sure that we realize that plane does have a ridge, there are two planes, there is a ridge, move the ridge, get the same clearance on both sides. Again, more than we would normally use for gold, because we're using porcelain and metal over here. The C plane, it's going to be angled like this. Obviously, we're going to make it a full plane of reduction. Obviously, the clearance with respect to a lower first premolar doesn't mean anything at all, but the lower second premolar might have be closer into occlusion on the distal side, so make sure we get a same 1.5 plus. But if there's no tooth in occlusion, make sure you reduce it. We've got to have metal and porcelain over that cusp. Okay, so there are a couple of new concepts, a couple new measurements, but basically the rest of it's the same as we normally do. Chamfer on the lingual, secondary plane on the lingual, chamfer through the proximal, join the shoulder on the facial, and we finish the prep. So again, the posterior teeth, there's a little bit more to look at in terms of occlusal reduction. But again, it's a combination of occlusal reduction and facial axial reduction that gives us the facial cusp reduction that we're looking for. Okay, and then on the lower arch, what we're looking for is clearance. For the A-plane, it's an A-plane. You know, that's what we've always been doing in the lower arch. Make that A-plane. Match the vertical angle to the opposing tooth, get the clearance that you want. In this case, 1.5 plus. You need to get enough clearance. We're not concerned about the aesthetics of the lower arch. Those teeth are covered with porcelain, so they look good. It's not the same kind of thing that we have for a facial cusp and sizable edges and facial cusp up here where there's light going through those areas. This is just, you know, do they look white or not on the lower teeth? So get enough clearance here, get enough clearance on the other side as well, 1.5 plus. If we're reducing a lower first premolar, we want to get lots of reduction on that lingual cusp. Don't under-reduce it just because it's so far from the opposing tooth. We're not looking at clearance at all. So just reduce it 1.5 millimeters or so. And then once we've got those areas done, the rest of it's pretty straightforward. 3 depth cuts, join together, angle of shoulder, secondary plane on the facial, chamfer on the lingual, bevel the lingual cusp, which is sharp, bring the chamfer through the proximal contact, join the shoulder on the facial. Okay, so that's all we have to do. So nothing much new compared to what we've already done here. On the lower arch, you know, be careful that you are taking, that secondary plane might have been a little bit angled wrong. Again, take the taper on the midfacial from the midfacial. Take the taper for the secondary plane from the occlusal third. Then you get your angle. So it's the same thing on the lower arch. You just have to look on the lower carefully as finding the middle third and trust that that's the angle that you need to have. Again, when you have a little short cusp that's not an occlusion, we're certainly going to reduce it so we can get lots of metal and porcelain over there. We're going to make sure we get the aesthetic reduction on the facial cusp on the maxillary. Get enough clearances so we're getting a thin layer of metal and plenty of porcelain, so we don't have to worry about the porcelain being weak or breaking in those areas. But at least 1.5 millimeters. We've been a little bit less than 1.5 millimeters on our gold crowns, but we can definitely go a little bit more. We might even say 1.5 to 2. Okay, so there's a lot more tolerance when it comes to ceramic crowns as far as the thickness. We want to make sure you have plenty of thickness. On a type knot, we're careful not to over-reduce, because then when you over-reduce, if we did 2 millimeters clearance, then we probably have really short little preps, depending upon the type of knot we have, and that looks unrealistic. It just looks awkward. So we're going to try to be fairly conservative, but still get at least a full 1.5 millimeter clearance in each of these areas I talked about. Okay?
For the upper premolar, there's a C plane and the secondary plane on the palatal surface, right?
On the palatal surface? Absolutely. Yep. So 2/3 like this, 1/3 like that, C plane like that.
And for the first premolar as well, because the lingual cusp is like...
A first premolar? That's a first premolar.
Lower first premolar.
Oh, okay. Well, A, B, C. So A plane like this, B plane, we get some clearance up here, but we're coming way down here. The central groove is way shifted lingually, isn't it? So just follow where the central groove was, and then just, get plenty of reduction on that little tiny lingual cusp. The clearance is meaningless on the lingual cusp.
Yeah. So it's like just preparing like similar to a canine maybe? Like,
Well, yeah, as long as you know how much you're reducing that cusp, then you should be okay.
okay.
Yeah, we don't have a particular height that I want to look at right there. Yeah. But yeah, a little bit more related to that. But again, mandibular canine.
Yeah.
Okay, how are we doing? Yep.
Just want to make sure the secondary plane always on the functional cusp, right? From axillary to lingual, no?
Secondary planes are wherever they're needed. Okay? So now on the upper tooth, okay? So the facial cusp has a little bit more vertical here. Well, don't have a. So for the maxillary molars, we have a fairly rounded surface on the lingual, and it's kind of rounded on the facial side as well. So oftentimes, if we get the tapers right in both those areas, secondary plane on both the facial and the lingual would be appropriate on the upper. On the lower, of course, we have secondary plane typically on the facial because of the rounded surface coming inward, as long as you don't over taper. On the lingual, the surface tends to lean lingually, doesn't it? Okay? So if we get a little taper on the lingual, we don't need a secondary plane. But the lower lingual is the only wall that we may not need a secondary plane for, or we probably don't ideally. Okay? Other walls we might not if we over taper and make a mistake. But if you do everything right, the lower lingual, probably with any taper at all, you don't need a secondary plane
So there is one for the upper molars, right?
on the facial and the lingual.
Yep.
But it's only if you over taper it, right?
No, he said that there is one. You're saying if there isn't one. If you over taper, you don't need one. If you don't over taper, you need one typically on the upper facial and lingual.
In the lower premolars, the tooth is pretty lingually, right?
So even for the premolar, we'd expect a little secondary plane, something like this. Just like over here.
So in the premolars, the lower first premolar, the crown tilts lingually. So if you give the taper, like let's say the C plane, if you make it, so like like the secondary plane, how does that work since the crown is tilted lingually?
Just like this. So again, we take the taper on the facial from the middle third. So that's the 2/3. We take the taper for the secondary plane from the occlusal third. That's the third here. So that's what we do. Then the A plane is going to be like this. So that's the facial reduction with the secondary plane. On the lingual, obviously we do some taper like that. And we have plenty of gold here, so we don't need to have a secondary plane there. When we always do the secondary plane by taking the burr, putting it against the adjacent tooth at the level of the occlusal third, and seeing if there's anything to cut at that angle. Nothing to cut because we've already tapered that. Okay. So again, always check by comparing. Remember the cook and the chef?
Yeah.
So taste it. Right? So take your burr on the adjacent tooth, occlusal 1/3, see if there's anything to cut at that angle. If there is, then cut it. If there isn't, don't cut it. Okay? That's a good rule of thumb, huh?
And it's the same for anterior teeth?
Yeah, sure. So what we're doing right here, there's the secondary plane there. Again, put the burr against the adjacent tooth at the level of the incisal third. And if there's something to cut, then we cut it. If you over tapered that already, obviously you got tons of reduction there, so you don't need it. All right, how are we doing? So third gear, not so bad. Second gear was tough. Third year, there's a lot of skills that we're going to be doing today that we've already been working on developing. So it's not so many new things.
So if you reduce occlusally like more than 2 mm for the
What?
PFM,
What? Premolar, canine, central,
for example, any tooth,
any tooth. Reduce incisally or occlusally
occlusally.
more than 2 millimeters.
Yeah, is it a failure, mistake?
Well, let me put it this way. Any mistake can be a failure. Okay, depends on degree. All right? So if you overextend facially on a class 2, so you have more than half millimeter clearance, is it a failure? That depends how much. Will it shorten the lifetime of the restoration? Now, I will even go this far. If it's an upper premolar and you overextend, and let's say it's an upper premolar or second premolar MO, and you overextend facially, and instead of half millimeter clearance, you get a millimeter clearance or a millimeter and a half clearance, and it's an amalgam prep, I would failure for that. Why? Why will that shorten the lifetime of the restoration? Will it be impossible to restore it and have it last? In this case, in that case I was saying, second premolar, mesial buccal area, overextended, it will probably not last because the patient will have you replace it. Okay, because there's going to be a lot of amalgam showing. Mesial buccal, overextended. That's the one area you don't want to overextend. Okay? If it's some other tooth, if it's an upper second molar DO and you overextend and you have a millimeter and a half clearance on the distal buccal, okay, well, the patient's friends aren't going to see it, so they're going to ask to have it replaced, so that's not going to shorten the lifetime. If we overextend that area, will it shorten the lifetime mechanically in some particular way? It depends. You've got amalgam hanging out there a little bit farther, coming around the corner. Have we done the internal parts in a way that would, support that? And is this tooth structure strong enough? Is it going to be retained enough? Can we picture forces in that area that might break that area away? Whatever. Once we start to get overextensions, it's the degree. Okay? How much have we overextended? How much will it compromise? If you're way out here, the only way to keep that restoration, if it's an amalgam restoration, the only way to keep that restoration firmly within the prep may be to put a pin on the gingival fork. Okay? To create some other kind of retention so that extra amalgam out there can be retained the way it should be. If failing putting the pin in, then we have a prep that probably will fail prematurely, and that will be a failing error. So it's all a matter of degree. Any error that we do can be a failing error, can be a major error by shortening the lifetime, but it depends on how much it is. Now, as you know, the slightest amount of unsupported enamel, the slightest acute angle, is going to fail you. It doesn't take much undermined enamel to flake away and open the margin, shorten the lifetime. So again, it's all a matter of when you're doing those worksheets to evaluate the preps. And look now. I'll be grading you on grading forms on Thursday. It's coming up. It's this week. Oh no, it's only a few days off. This is Tuesday. Wednesday, Thursday. 2 days. Oh, okay, you have an exam to take, don't you? So I'll be grading you on forms that are in your workbook. So they're there, you can look at them. And so there's all these error categories. There's also error severities across this way. So there's slight errors and moderate errors. Those are significant, but they do not fail the prep. They do not fail you. And then once we get beyond this heavy black line in the middle of the grade sheet and go over here, major errors and critical errors. Major errors are errors that will shorten the lifetime. And critical errors are errors that are so big that you can't even do the restoration. Okay? So I'll be grading you in each of those categories and each of those severities. But I could give you 50 errors that are slight and moderate. But if there's no errors that are major or critical, then it passes. Okay? So slight or moderate errors do not shorten the lifetime. Major and critical errors do. That's the big black line in the middle. That's the separating right there. So you have to learn to figure out. You might start thinking about it as you look at those grade sheets in the workbook between now and Thursday. You might think about, okay, well, what does make that? If I overextend gingerly, how much do I have to overextend before it's a failing error? Meaning it's shortening the lifetime of the restoration. What will it compromise? How will it compromise it in certain ways? Okay? So give that some thought, and then you'll get pretty mature when it comes to looking at a prep and seeing what you need to see. And especially when it comes to, you look at your own prep. You've done a prep in a patient's mouth, you look at it, say, wait a minute, that's going to fail the restoration prematurely, so you make a little change. That's what separates the good dentist from the not so good dentist. Okay? What really separates the good dentist from the not so good dentist is which one cares. The good dentist cares. And when it comes to the quality of the dentistry, just the skill and the quality of the dentistry, it's all a matter of, how they pay attention. And again, how much they care. But they also have to know to look at their preps and to know what errors are going to be important for the patient. Okay? So if you do a crown prep, you charge the patient $1,500 for a crown, and if it fails in 10 years, then you did a bad job. If you look at a prep and you say, okay, that has an error, that's going to fail the preparation prematurely, fail the restoration prematurely, so better change that. And then you care enough to change it, take 5 seconds, change that. That might make the difference between the crown lasting 10 years and 30 years. A 2-second fix can make the difference between the crown lasting 10 years and 30 years. Okay? If you're doing a groove and a flare and you have a step at the bottom of the groove, if you don't make the smooth connection between the chamfer and the bottom of the flare, then it's probably going to last 10 years. If you did make that smooth connection, it will probably last 30 years. Okay? Those are things to be paying some attention to. Again, if you are looking to do the very best dentistry that can be done for your patient, then that's the level at which you have to be concerned, and that's the level of knowledge that you have to have as far as what to look for and what you have to see. Okay?